I'm Daniel Schulof, a complete charlatan with a massive financial conflict of interest, and this is Dogs, Dog Food, and Dogma. Today's show is the top 5 things that every pet owner needs to know about dietary carbohydrate. So if you've read my book, you know that one of the core theses is that carbohydrate is way worse for the health of dogs and cats than the veterinary community is currently being taught during veterinary school, and way worse than most lay pet owners understand in the first instance. But let's put that completely aside for now. Let's not worry about me trying to persuade you about what I think the body of evidence says. Let's just talk about the role that carbohydrates play in pet food and what you need to know as a pet owner about how to understand how much of them is in the product and where they're used and where they're not. So the first thing that every dog owner should know about carbohydrate in dog food is that dogs don't have a nutritional requirement for dietary carbohydrate. That's not the case with most nutrients. The scientific community knows really well the amount of protein that a dog needs to take in every day in order to prevent it from developing like a disease of deficiency. And they know the same thing about fats and about vitamins and minerals, and there are like dozens of all these different things. Carbohydrate is the exception. There is no dietary requirement for carbohydrate, not for energy, not for brain power, not for anything. The second thing that every dog owner needs to know about carbohydrate and dog food is that Kibble products, the kind of really popular stuff that's like scoop and serve and has the really long shelf life, they're almost all built around dietary carbohydrates. So what do I mean when I say that Kibble style products are typically built around dietary carbohydrate? Well, what I mean is basically what I've said, is that like the most common nutrient in many, if not most Kibble products is dietary carbohydrate. And there are kind of two different reasons for this. One is that it's really functionally useful when you're making kibble. So basically when you make kibble, it's like making meaty bread. You mix this dough together, you heat it up, and then you dry it out. And when you heat it up, just like when you bake the batter that you use to make a loaf of bread, what happens is the carbohydrate molecules in the dough gelatinize. They basically melt down and they serve to hold the rest of the dough together so that when you heat it up and it expands, it all stays together. And flour does the same thing in a loaf of bread. So if you've ever tried to like bake a loaf of bread without flour in it, you know it just falls apart. And so you like need largely that carbohydrate in order to hold the stuff together. But there's a second reason that carbohydrate is so common in kibbles, and that's that it's really inexpensive. It's far cheaper to buy a pound of corn or a pound of rice or a pound of flour than it is to buy a pound of chicken or salmon or lamb. And for that reason, it's attractive for pet food producers. It's less expensive for them to produce products that are more carbohydrate rich than protein rich. The third thing that every dog owner needs to know about carbohydrate in dog food is that dog food producers in the United States aren't required to tell consumers how much carbohydrate is in their products. It's amazing, but it's true. If you look at the back of a can of Coke, you'll see the FDA's nutrition fact panel on the back of it. And you'll see on that all the stuff that you're probably familiar with. It's got a statement of how much carbohydrate, how much protein, how much fat, how many calories, all that good, useful information. The back of a dog food label has an equivalent to that. It's called a guaranteed analysis panel, and it's got nutrition info in it. But one thing it's missing is really important. It's missing the carbohydrate content. There is no requirement for pet food producers to tell pet owners how much carbohydrate is in their product. Obviously, that's a really big deal because like I've told you, not only do dogs not have any dietary requirement for carbohydrate, but nonetheless, the vast majority of these products are built around carbohydrate. So it's pretty farcical, in my opinion, that US law doesn't even require producers to tell pet owners how much is in there. The fourth thing that every dog owner needs to know about carbohydrate in dog food is that there's no such thing as a low carbohydrate dog food. And that probably seems a little ridiculous coming from the founder of KetoNatural Pet Foods, a company whose main shtick is making dog food with less carbohydrate in it. But it's true. And what I mean by that when I say it's true is that the relevant regulations in the US expressly prohibit pet food manufacturers from using the expression low carbohydrate, low starch, low sugar, or anything that's kind of in any way like that. And so if you make a product that's actually low in carbohydrate content, they make it so that you can't even communicate it to the consumer. So not only are pet food manufacturers not required to tell you how much carbohydrate is in there, but the ones who are making real low carb products can't even tell you that either. And between those two things, you can imagine it's a real recipe for misleading consumers. The fifth and final thing that every dog owner needs to know about carbohydrate and dog food is that eating carbohydrate is incredibly unnatural for a dog. So what do I mean by that when I say it's unnatural? What I mean is that for more than 99.9% of the domestic dog's evolution as a canine species, they didn't eat any carbohydrate whatsoever. And we know this as a scientific fact because we know that the divergence between dogs and their cousins, gray wolves, occurred really, really recently. The two species are as similar as two different species can be. They can actually interbreed with each other, which is not something that two species can usually do, but they're so similar that they're a special exception. And we know that wolves, gray wolves, even today, consume 0.0% carbohydrate. They eat around the stomach lining of big prey that have like big bellies full of grasses and things like that. They don't make a digestive enzyme that dogs have learned to make since their divergence with wolves that allow them to digest carbohydrate. So whether or not your dog is eating carbohydrate, whether or not there's lots of carbohydrate in the pet food landscape, just know that for 99.9% of its evolution, the vast majority of it, they didn't touch the stuff. And that's what I mean when I say it's not natural for a dog to eat carbohydrate. And those are the 5 things that every dog owner needs to know about dietary carbohydrate in dog food. I'm Daniel Schulof, a complete charlatan with a massive financial conflict of interest. Thanks for watching.